I'm hoping it'll go smoother this afternoon than this morning, although it wasn't a disaster this morning. We got it done. All right, so I'm going to zoom up. Now, the easiest way to open your virtual machine is just VM, to do it from within VMware. And again, on your own machine, if you have a Windows machine, you don't need a virtual machine, right? This is just because we don't have any permissions on the underlying box. Yeah.
What was the password again for your
password?
Password.
P@SSW0RD1. All right. So I already have one loaded. If you don't have one loaded, in fact, I want to load a new one. So I'm going to go back to home. I'm going to open a virtual machine. Do you guys need me to go back?
Oh, no.
Okay. So I'm going to open a virtual machine. This one I'm going to go to documents because I opened it, I loaded it there too. I'm going to do this. You want this little 3, I think those are supposed to be like 3 windows. I'm going to open. And again, you don't have to do this if you've already got it. I'm doing it again because I'm going to take ownership. I have 2 of them here. I have 2 sections of this. I already did the install in one. I don't want to install twice into the same one. So I have a second copy of this. I'm going to select that and then power on. Doesn't matter if you moved or copied it. Are you updating?
It's doing this automatically.
Yeah, it's automatic. It's updating. Hopefully it won't take too long. This just tells you what you're connected to. Okay. And as I've said, it's easiest if you enter full screen mode if you're doing this on this box. You guys okay? You with me? I think we did this all last time, right?
Is it advisable to, like within the virtual machine, should we not put in like passwords and stuff? Because I tempted to like log in on my Google account to take notes.
Oh, you could do that. I don't care. I don't think anybody else should be able to see.
Well, that's what I was wondering. Is like, is that going to be a security thing?
One of the nice things about a virtual machine, I don't know about passwords and things, but inside the virtual machine, like if you were to go somewhere and get a virus, it shouldn't cross over to the underlying machine unless you drag and drop between them, which you can do. So it should be safe. Also, if it's in your own account, nobody else should be able to get to it.
Gotcha. Well, just because we're logging in with your Steve
right,
account,
yeah. Well, so the Steve account, that is the same everywhere. So if somebody got into your outer account, you know, when you log into that machine, they could log into the Steve one because it's the same. If you want to change the password, you can. With this caveat, I can't fix it if you forget it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're okay? No? What is
like what you're doing. Seattle College is okay. Or no, the Gmail one is set up.
the password when you get in there will be password. Let me click on it. You got in, okay. Did you get in?
Yeah.
Looks like you started. And the password again, p at ssw0rd1. I would not have made you all Steve, but so it is possible to change that password. But again, the caveat that if you forget, I can't help you. Whereas on these outer machines, I can because it's Active Directory. But here, you'd just be screwed. The other thing is we could change the users. I might show you how, but we'd have to also make the user. We'd have to add them to SQL Server as an admin. So it's a little bit of complications there, but you can. My shoe is untied. Let me get that. It will. So is everybody sort of in? You just gotta. Is that the machine you copied the virtual machine down on, or have you done that yet?
I don't know. I mean, I haven't used specific stuff.
Then it won't be there. The virtual machine won't be there. We can copy it. It'll take a little while. Okay, are we ready mostly? So for the virtual machine, go. Yeah, I did. It's not there. Go to folder. Go to this PC. Put this PC. Users. Other. Show virtual machines. Copy that. It's going to take you about 10 minutes, so you'll get a little, this right here. It'll take about 10 minutes. We'll catch you up in a moment. All right, so in your virtual machine, if you're there, if you want, I wouldn't do this right now, but you can download Chrome or whatever you want. I would do it later. This is Edge. It's what you got. I don't believe those metrics, by the way.
That's their motto. It's what you got.
Yeah. There are some nice things about Edge, but there are also some real drawbacks to it. So it's sort of a mixed bag. It's better than Internet Explorer. It is. So password. Capital P at SSW0RD. I'll also show you new Okay, so we want to download. I'm going to open up the Zoom inside of here. All right, so we want to just search for the SQL Server Express, and we want the download, right? The SQL Server Express download. And I'm just going to click on the downloads. And I would go down here. There's 2 of them you can have for free. And if you're doing this on your own machine, it's sort of up to you what you want. The developer is the complete enterprise level SQL Server. They're offering it for free. The difference between the developer and the enterprise is that this is not licensed for anything but learning, basically, right? Whereas the enterprise one, which costs thousands of dollars, is the license to run your business on. Don't do this one for your virtual machine. It's just huge. It's several gigabytes huge. So that's something to think about when you're doing it on your own machine. But it does have everything, all the features SQL Server has. We're going to do Express, which is a lot lighter, but has everything we need. We're just going to make a database. We're not going to do all sorts of networking things. So we'll do Express. And both of these are always free. We're just going from Microsoft for that. When you do this, just you can save it or run it. There's some advantages to both. I usually just do run. But then if it crashes, you have to go back and download it again. If you save it, the installer will be in your download box. But I'm going to just run it. When you get this, you always have to say yes. I've had people say no, and then nothing happens because you've aborted, basically. You have to give it permission to run. And it will eventually bring up the SQL Server Express Edition installer. And we can just do basic. If you want to do custom, you can, but I'm going to just do basic. You can also here have a chance to download the media if you want it in your download files, but I'm just going to run basic. You have to agree. And now if you do not agree, it's all over at that point, no more install. I will admit to never having read this. As I said, I've probably given away my firstborn child more than once. And then once I do that, I will do install. And I would always go for the default place unless you've got a good reason not to. If you install somewhere else, you probably have to.
Are we just doing the basic? I'm sorry.
Yeah, basic. So if you're doing this on your own machine, this is all you have to do. You don't need the virtual machine. You just can install SQL Server. It's up to you if you want it on there.
Yeah. Can you mess your machine up with a database program?
Not usually. I have several on mine and never had an issue. They can be a bit of a pain to uninstall because there tend to be multiple parts. So uninstalling them may not be as simple as just a uninstall. You might have to go and uninstall several things. Everybody going okay? If it asks you to restart, you do need to restart, and it may mean also going back and getting the download files again, since we did run instead of. I'm hoping it won't say restart to anybody. It's weird to me. All these machines are identical. All the virtual machines are identical, and yet this seems to happen differently on every machine. Once you get it up, we'll get it installed. Did it not work? I agree that this isn't working right now. Not as good. The other two is something. So one of them doing and installing is mostly watching lines move across the screen. It's not really exciting. So the Express Edition has some limits. They're not terrible. No database can be bigger than 4 gigabytes. That's a fairly good database, but it's not commercial size. It's better than Oracle that limits you to like 100 rows per table. For their Express.
What's a decent sized database usually in terms of size?
So if it depends on the business. They could 4 gigabytes would run a small business probably just fine. And you can have multiple databases. There's no limit on how many databases, but no database can be more than 4 gigs. A commercial database can run in terabytes or even in the petabytes.
It's like Seattle Central's database.
So there are hundreds of different databases. All the community colleges share the same database, and it's not relational. It is a hierarchical database written in COBOL on a Unix machine. So it's becoming almost useless, but it has 40 years worth of data from every community college and technical school in the state. So they've been offloading it into mostly SQL Server, but they literally have hundreds of databases, which are mostly just pulling from that HP Unix. They're trying to move it all to PeopleSoft with mixed success.
How much is something like that going to cost them?
I'm sure hundreds of millions.
Hundreds of millions.
It's the whole
Wow.
state, right?
Yeah. Wow.
SQL Server, the Express, or not the Express, the Enterprise Edition, can cost you up to $25,000 per processor. And there are installations of it that are many, many millions of dollars with it. Why would you pay for it? I guess it has a lot of features that you usually don't get in the open source ones. Plus support, plus the security.
What software is PeopleSoft running?
I have no idea what the underlying database structure is. It could be proprietary or they could be using, if I were to guess, I would say Oracle, but I don't know. Okay, so when you get to where you are, hold 1 minute. Okay, we're there. How many people are there? Okay, so there's two parts of this install. We also need the SSMS. Microsoft doesn't explain what that is right on this, but it's SQL Server Management Studio. It's the graphical front end. What we've downloaded and installed right now is the server. The server runs in the background as a process. It's running on your machine all the time. If you want, I can show you where to shut it off if you want. But it's running in the background. It usually doesn't affect much, but it's because you could always be wanting to access the database, so it's always there and it's always running. So we want to install the SSMS, which would be nice if it would just install from there, but what it does is it throws you back to the web page. So you want to do Microsoft Edge. And we want to download the SQL Server Management. We want the 17.9 and we want the top one. The second one is if you're upgrading an older one. The top one is the one we want.
Should we run or save that one?
Probably run. Again, the advantage of saving it is if it fails, you have the media to go back to. This seems to be going pretty smoothly though, which is.
Go back to install.
Yours might be a little slower because of the Wi-Fi on here.
Oh, this one?
Yeah, it might be a little slower because of the
I'm
Wi-Fi.
taking notes.
So it'll launch a second install here in a second, in a moment.
The top one.
Yes, the top one. Download SQL Server Management Studio 17.9.
So this is kind of a smart screen.
Yeah, just do run. That came up a lot last time, but when you do run, it seems to work. Yes. All right, so it's running the security scan. Now, I don't know if I'll get that. Can't find the smart screen or not. Sometimes it pops up, sometimes it doesn't. See, this is fine. Just to run, it still works.
Which one of the two?
The top one, not the upgrade one. The top one.
Okay.
Now, you should get, this doesn't necessarily come to the front. If you have this flashing shield down here, that's where you have to say yes. That's, if I click on that, that brings it up to this. So you have to say yes. And then it should launch. It takes it a second. Yeah. So there, here's the management studio, and it might show up behind your other one. Oh shoot. So I'm going to have to restart. See this where it says restart? All you say restart? If it doesn't say restart, that's great. And I do not know why some say restart and some say don't. But for me, I'm going to have to restart, and then I'm going to have to download it again because I did a run. Just not the whole SQL Server, just SQL Server is installed. It's just the management studio. I'm hoping it's only doing that as an upgrade and not. There is a really big Windows update coming soon, and I really don't want it. It could. You may end up in here coming to do some work and have to watch a blue screen for a while it updates. So you can just do this. If you don't have to restart, you can just do it. So you hit
Yeah, he's waiting for it to.
Yeah.
Mine popped up.
Right, there should be a little
There
flash.
it is.
Yeah.
That's just. And it's possible that you want to see the installer behind the browser.
Yeah,
So once I'm back up, I will finish my install. All things said, though, this is going pretty smoothly. Yours is going okay? Once you get yours done, once you get
I wish I could tell Microsoft.
Yeah.
It's 30% complete. I think I'm installing some Windows and updates as well.
No, that's when it started. It's on the virtual side, right?
Yes, restart the virtual. If it does, it won't work if you don't restart. So.
Oh, yeah.
That's good. So you work required to restart.
Is it trying to install Visual Studio 315?
Oh, are you doing the?
Oh, really?
You have any other version?
Seriously.
That's the government.
Yeah. ISIS. I don't know why ISIS would be doing that. They just undermine their power. So they should be happy with it. Yeah.
If you go to view. Sometimes these virtual machines kind of freeze up. Patience is usually your best.
I wonder how serious that
If
is.
that fails, you can try to restart. Oh, come on. Yay. Okay. Lost my pretty picture though. Yeah.
Yeah, I still might have
Uh,
been in here a while. I caught up to it. Yeah, I don't think. So, it's pausing, is that part of the normal process?
It has some moments where it pauses when it's
For
when it's what
3 minutes?
could be. These are not as fast as if it was on the underlying machine typically.
Oh, it did.
Yeah, and the big thing that it's downloading is the Visual Studio shell.
Oh,
So I'm just curious. I think I have to go reinstall though. In fact, I'm sure I do. I know what I was in there for. I was going to see if it's in my download media. It is not.
that's good. Patience. It's for cheap.
So you guys are mostly ahead of me, not everyone.
Right there.
Yes, I said. So if you had to restart, once you restart, if you go back and get it, it'll run this time. Needing to uninstall doesn't make sense. Sure, but
For example, it's trying to install an older version.
it does. It does for SQL Server. But it should be able to go to SQL Server.
Mine's crazy.
I mean, I installed it for now.
Well, should be able to install it. You should probably install it.
Smiley face.
Once I get there, I'll show you
It's great.
how to get into SQL Server and I'll show you.
Completed,
how to-
okay.
So it's
Okay, yeah, that one. It's there for.
So when you restart, you probably.
I thought it was.
Yeah, just.
We're waiting on the next step.
Yep.
No. It's a survey based thing. So I think cover over it.
That's the part of the feedback button.
I don't want to.
I know.
Non-data stuff.
Yes, they've got through the master supervisor.
So I didn't say I'd be curious about the 18 preview, but I'm not sure I would advise downloading it. Yeah. Yeah, if everything is done, then definitely the management studio too.
Yeah, the management studio. Now I don't know.
Yeah, that should be fine. Yeah, if everything's completed, you can close the installers. This is where a lot of you mentioned it pause here.
Oh, yeah.
So it's downloading the Visual Studio shell, which is the biggest part of the download. It's actually, so SQL Server Management Studio is a Visual Studio shell, if that means anyone to anybody.
So if you have this, do you have Visual Studio as well?
No,
It's just like
but
a
if you
skin
had a full
version?
version of Visual Studio, you could use it.
Ah.
Visual Studio can behave as a shell. I mean, you can connect your databases in Visual Studio and do most of the stuff you can do in the Management Studio. Not everything, but most of it.
Why are we doing the database on the virtual machine? I forget to do that.
Because you don't have any permissions to install anything on the
Oh,
underlying.
but the virtual machine, yeah.
That's the only reason, actually. Because it would behave much better on the underlying machine.
I want to look at the same specific documents.
So again, on the laptop, all you have to do is go there and install it in a legal virtual machine, unless it's a Mac.
Yeah, that is one.
Yeah.
I've never thought
So you just go in.
That's the only.
I wouldn't have, if it happened, I feel bad. I would never have known.
And then,
I've never wanted to go out of my way. It's like, oh, thank God.
Yeah, I think I would feel relief, honestly. As that sounds.
Yeah. We're messed up.
Yeah.
it's
Our position.
It goes back to the 50s.
It's so sad. It's comparison.
so the standard big
Like a blow.
So in a few minutes, we'll open up the.
California.
Nice.
I moved from California.
Uh-huh.
And this guy was
Wow.
like, so now, another 20 years.
20 years.
Before I kick it off.
Yeah.
I got my life plan.
Some people retire to Florida.
Oh,
With climate change, just keep moving north.
I was on in Florida. Thunderstorm.
Yeah. I've lived in Florida, so.
She's over.
Well, I wasn't on the ground very much. So I went on the ground. I'm the only person in the world that enjoys it.
So really?
I was there in September.
Well, it's fun at first. But once you're there for a long time, it's
You're still loading.
at first.
Did you have to restart?
Yeah.
It seems to be adding some Windows updates, but I think there is some have to restart.
So they probably do have better
Windows updates.
It's just easy to have.
It's like you're don't have to live a nerdy
Right.
somehow.
Okay.
But yeah, there's enough out there. A lot of nothing.
Where are you, north or south?
I got a little bit of Georgia.
Yeah, but pretty much anything north of Central Florida is just
Yeah, Boca Raton, Key West.
Orlando.
Funny thing is, I was nice when it was so. It's dumbass. He looks down and it's semi-clear. there's like a light show, it's like a strip club down there. And I'm like, what? Like, what are you talking about? We're at and he's like, yeah, right there. There's purple lights. Hang on a second. I looked over. I couldn't figure it out. So what the hell could you do?
I'm gonna wait just a minute till a couple more people are done.
Where are you gonna chart? Orlando. It's gotta be Disney for us. Yeah, but I waited. I'm like, Orlando. I don't know where it was from the city. I didn't know where it was. I'm like, he's like, oh, no, I know. And then I looked and I realized because they had in the distance I heard the kitchen fireworks underneath the clouds. So it's like these little flash, like random flash of colors. Aviation. Nothing happens like that. Something exploded.
Yeah.
They were like purple ones. Like,
So I am done.
then I figured it out.
You guys have any questions? Well, because I'm gonna wait a little. Some of you are already connecting, which is fine. Oh, where is it? As I said, I'm going to give you a couple more minutes for those that are still installing. Yeah.
Mine's going nowhere.
It's like further down.
You're such a good student. Actually, I
Sometimes
they
they
have
have
that.
Probably,
So I'm gonna
took
do
a
the
really
same
long
play.
time.
I was like, oh, this is awesome.
And then
Yeah,
it's
just
stuff.
The one that I had.
A lot of them.
And I had to get something on there. Perfect. Something.
No, it says don't turn it off.
Right, sometimes if you kill it.
Yeah.
Like, that's where I started.
So I would try. Give it a
You
few
might have
minutes.
that.
I'm not sure why
Bottom
it's
of
doing
I'll be-
this.
This is the worst.
Read that one?
No, I didn't. But I only looked at 3 or 4 sites. Yeah, I got 4.
But feedback. You know, I put on there. And you know what? That one's always the green job. So I'm hesitant to take it out. I do understand, but hesitant. The reason is,
It's like the Bill said, I mean, there's some people that are one little unique thing that you want to put on there, that's how it gets people. To say something.
because you know,
Some of these are kind of slow, and I'm not sure why.
So that's always been my response. And they're like, oh, okay. And I usually get redo it. I've never had a problem.
It's fine.
Yeah, basically, once I get basic,
Yeah, it's just basically gonna be
unless
shut
they
down.
hate me,
Yeah.
it's not a problem. But I gotta get there.
No,
I'm gonna take a look at it in just a minute. I'm gonna give it like about 5 more minutes. And then what I will do is I'll show you SQL Server. It's gonna be mostly show and tell today. We'll actually start it on probably, today is Monday to Wednesday. I can never remember what days I'm in what class. Okay, so you're done.
I would think that it's like good to have the one little thing that's on there that's like, you know, over here, it's a whole thing. That's what makes them ask about it.
Oh, here.
Because it gives you the ability to actually talk about it or something. Yeah.
Yeah, you-
Yeah, on both.
Oh, yeah. No, you don't have to.
And you're done now?
The bottom that's-
So I think it's just computer.
Yeah.
Yeah, put it at the bottom, or they put it somewhere.
That's really all we need done, so that's like a big
Yeah.
Circle those and says, no way. I'm like, okay. I get it.
Oh, did somebody?
Yeah, I'm one of the other ones. They circled the, like, I don't know, something else. And they said, no way.
Yeah, some of the comments.
Which I get it. I
Like, do
agree.
that.
No, I wasn't mad at all, but I thought,
No, they were going to go along.
no, I was not mad at any comments.
Okay.
I mean, I literally.
Let me know.
Together. I was just titled this and start typing and I forgot to look at it.
Yeah.
But I think serious about doing that.
Also, if you really want to let me know of this,
You know about memories?
all right, how you and everyone else is done, right? You're still installing it. All right, I'm going to show you a little bit. As I said, this is mostly show and tell, and it is being recorded.
Yeah.
You might want to skip the first part of this recording, but it's been recording everything so far. All right, so I'm going to go over here. You can usually bring it up by typing Microsoft SQL Server Management, which is right here. But if you go down here, you see that there's Microsoft SQL Server 2017 and SQL Server Tools. There's a whole bunch of stuff that we're not going to deal with in here. Those are all different tools. I mean, all different pieces of SQL Server. The only part we really want right now is the Management Studio. And a lot of you have already opened it already. When it comes up, you'll get this. Wonder why Microsoft recently has gone all basic black. For their design. I'm not sure what particular settings it's loading. I should look into that. All right, so it should pop up a thing like this window. You always have to connect to the SQL Server because this Management Studio is not SQL Server. It's a client. Did you find it? Okay. It's a client to SQL Server. It's a front end. It's kind of like, if anybody done MySQL, it's kind of like PHP admin. You know, it's not MySQL. It's just a way of talking to MySQL in a graphical way. This is the same that. If you're running SQL Express, this is the name of the machine, and then SQL Express. You can also, the server, you can get by with a dot, which is just a shortcut for the machine name, / SQL Express. If you downloaded the full version of SQL Server, you want localhost instead. This is just for SQL Express. You want to connect, and it will connect the GUI to SQL Server. Closing the Management Studio does not close SQL Server. Opening it does. I mean, the SQL Server is running in the background all the time. So we have on this server, there are no actual databases except for the system databases. I'll talk about them real briefly. For the most part, I would just say leave them alone. Okay. One of the principles of a relational database is that everything about the databases, everything about the tables, are also stored in databases and stored in tables. So there are tables, there are databases that keep track of what the tables are in a database and keep track of all the columns in a table. They keep track of information about information. They keep track of what they call meta information. The good thing about that is that just as you can query the data in a database, you can also question the structure of a database. If you want to know what tables are in the database, you can run a query that returns all the tables in the database. If you want to know what columns are in the table, you can run a query to get the columns in the table. You can get not just the data that's in those columns, but the names of those columns and everything else. So every relational database has system databases. Sometimes they hide them from you for good reason. Microsoft is not hiding them. That being said, you generally don't want to mess with them. Master in particular. Master keeps track of all the databases on the server. It also keeps track of all the logins and users on the server level. And it keeps track of all the other server level objects. If the master database is corrupt, your SQL Server is dead. You have to reinstall. So don't mess with the master. You should be able to just do it. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, it's the.
And I think your slide is a long way. You did like a Linux web slash, and it's more like DOS. All right, the model database, and again, it's something that is just a template. Whenever you say create database and you don't give it any parameters, it just copies the model database. So if you wanted to add some tables to every database, like you wanted every database to have a login table or a logging table, you could add that to the model, and every database that you make would have that table in it. Right? So it's a template for all your databases. You can override that template by specifying parameters, but if you don't override it, then that's what you get is whatever's in the model. MS DB is basically a scheduling database. One of the things, if you're a database administrator, and we're not going to go there here, but you want to automate as much as you can. You don't want to have to do too much that's hands-on, particularly if it's routine. So if you want to do a backup every night or a backup every 10 minutes, if you want a log shipped to another copy of the database every 10 minutes, you can schedule all of those events in, basically those schedules are stored in here. You can also store users that are going to get texted if something goes wrong in the database. You can do, there's lots of stuff you can store in here that will help you automate your database. We're not going to do that though, just to let you know that it exists. And then the temp DB is really just a scratch file. It's where when the SQL Server is running queries and things, it often has to create intermediate tables and things, and they all go into the temp DB. A lot of the stuff in the temp DB only exists for a few seconds or less. But it's just basically a scratch database for putting things temporarily. You can access those things from stored procedures and triggers, but we're not going to write those either. They're a little bit advanced. Does that make sense? Those are the system databases. For our purposes, just leave them alone. All right, so I'm going to make a new database. Are you guys ready? This is, even though it's a new database, I'm not going to make Vince's. So it's just going to be a sample. So I'm going to say new database. And the way I got that, I right-click on database, and I do new database. So when I say right-click on the database and say new database, it gives me this dialog. The other thing I will say too, everything that you do in the GUI you could do in SQL and probably faster. You have to know SQL to do that. So I'm going to give the database a name. We did that bakery thing, right? So let's do bakery. I'm not going to make the whole bakery database right now, but we'll build that a little bit. So I did just gave it a name, and this is actually all you have to do. I just want to point out a couple of other things. The owner is default. That means whoever owns the server, which is us right now, has the the ownership. There are always, at a minimum, 2 files. The primary file here that says rows primary, this is the main database file. It has the table structure, it has all the data that you put in. Everything that you think of as the database is pretty much in this one data file. You can break that up. We're not going to, but you can break it up into multiple files if you want. Like when it says add down here, that means add files, right? We're not going to do that. And it will physically change the files. The log, and there's always a log file, the log keeps track of transactions that occur in the database. Particularly since your last backup. The thing with the log files is if you had a total screw up, and I will eventually, I'll show you how to do a total screw up. You could restore from your backup files and then run your log up until the moment that you had the screw up and restore all of the transactions that occurred since your last backup. Does that make sense? The log keeps track of everything that you do in the database, and you can then go through and restore it. The log files can get really large, and so can the database files actually in time. But you always have those 2 files. And if you're going to move the database, which I'll try to show you how to do later, you have to move both of those files. The other thing I will say is that the log file should never be on the same disk as the database file. If that disk crashes, then your log goes too, and you've lost everything. The log file should not only be on a different disk, it should be in a different machine. But we're going to leave it where it is. All right. Couple of options. I'm not going to go through all the options. In order to restore from log, you have to do full here rather than simple. Default, anybody know what the collation is? Collation? It's okay if you don't, I'm just curious. You did it to the desktop? Oh, actually. Did you do it to the desktop? That's fine. Well, I'm sorry. What's that? Here? Oh. It'll be, this is the password. And you will be me, everybody's me. All right. So collation is what language you're in. So by default, because our machines are American English, that's what they will be. If you install this in London, you get London English. There are some differences in spelling, but also when you do money, there is a money data type. When you do money in American, it's dollars. If you were in London, it would be pounds. If you were in France, it would be euros. So it inherits that. You are not limited, even though it's American English, you can actually put data in it in other languages. You're not limited only to the character set in American English. So most of these things are defaults. You have all sorts of things that you can set, but I would, as I said, for right now, I just leave them alone. But there are all sorts of little features that you can turn on or off. And then you have your file groups. If you were to add multiple files, and you can group them into file groups. We're going to ignore that. The only thing you really have to do is give it a name and do OK. And then when you come over here, you'll see that there's a bakery database. And when you click the little plus beside it, you'll see that there's all sorts of subfolders in here. And one of the subfolders is tables. We don't have any. It gives you different kinds of tables. We'll do that in a moment. There's also a security. There's database level security, and then there's server level security. So there's two security folders. We'll talk about that at some point. This secures like users logging into the server. This gives you permissions on the objects in the database. Right now we own everything, so we have all the permissions. All right, so I'm going to show you 3 ways to make tables. Are you kind of set up yet?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me get you going a little bit. So, first of all, go to view. So I'm going to show, as I said, 3 ways to make tables, with the third way probably being the one you want to do it. So the first 2. I'm going to right-click on tables. If you're a Mac user, Microsoft can drive you nuts with how many menus are only available by right-clicking. So I'm going to say table. And what it does is it gives me a little designer to make a table. And this will work, but it's not going to be my favorite one. So I'm going to do, let's do customer. It's still table 1, but we'll name it when we save it. I'm going to do customer ID. I'm going to do integer. And then I'm going to talk about data types in a moment, but I'm going to set the primary key. Again, I right-click and I set the primary key. There might be, I was looking to see if there was another way to set the primary key. I think you can in Table Designer. Now it's removed, but you can set it from the menu too. All right, so if I want this to be an auto number, I can go way down here. There's properties. So there are column properties down here. And if I scroll down, there's a thing called identity specification. If I say is identity and change it to yes, way over here, it turns it into an auto number. They call out auto numbers identities. And it starts at 1 and counts by 1. So you could change that. If you want to start at 1,000, you could start at 1,000. And you can count by whatever you want. You don't have to make these auto numbers, especially for us, because we're only going to add 5 or 6 records per table. So it's not a big savings to do that. So let's do customer name. I'm not going to fill everything out either. This is just a show. So I am going to, if we look down here, there's a lot of different data types. I would probably choose in-car 50. Does anybody have any idea what that is? It's a character type. It's 50 long. They can have a max of 255. The longest character value for value stored in the table is 255. Anybody have an idea what the N stands for? What?
Number.
It's character. It actually stands for Unicode. Why N for Unicode, I don't know. Most databases I've worked with don't differentiate between ASCII and Unicode. It's all just Unicode. But Microsoft does. It puts an N in front of Unicode. And so there is a varchar. Varchar would be just ASCII. In varchar is Unicode. Generally, I would do Unicode because that allows you to enter non-English characters. If you wanted a Japanese name in Japanese, you could do it if it's in varchar. If it's varchar, you cannot. If you wanted a Greek name or a Russian name, you could do that in varchar. Couple of things. In varchar max This is if you need to enter a large document. You have up to 2 billion characters that you can do there, or 2 billion bytes, 2 gigabytes. However, you can retrieve it, but you can't query it because it's not stored in the table. All that's stored in the table is a pointer to where that is elsewhere in the file. Tables have a max size, or table row. Each table row has a max size of 14K. For technical reasons that I'm not sure what's going into. Has to do with how the data structure is set up. Here's another thing. What is the difference between var and, like, there's one above it that's just in-car. Anybody have an idea?
Variable.
Yeah, variable versus not variable. So if you did a character in-car, it's fixed width. So if you said in-car 50, it would always write 50 character spots to disk, even if you only use 5 of them. Right, so it's very inefficient on disk space. But varchar uses processor time because it always has to calculate the length. Varchar only saves the amount that it actually is to disk, so it's much more efficient on the disk, but it has to calculate the length of every value you put in it. So that means processor time. Which is better? Depends on your system and what you're doing. You know, which is more valuable to you, processor time or disk space? And it can be different depending on what you're doing. All right. So there's a lot of other data types there. I don't think I'm going to go through all of them, or even many of them. The main thing I want to tell you is that a lot of them are very specialized. I'm going to show you the ones that we use all the time. I use 5 or 6 of them constantly and the others rarely. Does that make sense? So I don't know if you need to know what every type is. You can look them up. Let's do customer email, and we'll call this a good table, even if it doesn't have everything in it. And again, what I would do is just probably in varchar, if you want it to be bigger, you can add characters up to 255. Oh, you guys know what what this means?
Whether or not you allow entries that have nothing in them?
Right. Null is nothing, right? Null means that there's nothing there. So if you uncheck them, and this is a little counterintuitive. You think checking them would make them required, but it's the opposite. Unchecking makes them required. What that means is if I'm entering data in this table, I have to put in their name and their email.
Oh.
They're not, you can't skip those things. If there's something that's optional, like maybe you want their email, but you don't care about their name, you could do that. Then the name would be optional, but the email is required. Does that make sense? So I'm going to save it. Now here's where I get to name it. So I'm going to do customer, and I'm going to do OK. And notice it doesn't show up over here. I have to right-click on tables and do refresh, and then it'll be there. So when I open this, the table, it has down here, it has the columns. Notice the little black key for the primary key. We'll look at foreign keys in a moment. There's other things that can be here. We won't worry about them right now. So that's one way to make a table. It's not my favorite way, but it works. I'll show you why I prefer other ways in a moment. Questions on that? No questions? It all perfectly clear? I don't expect this all to fit in for you to remember it all. Once you start building it, I imagine I'll be circulating and helping you build. All All right, so I'm going to show you another way. As I said, remember the third way is the way I'm going to suggest you do things. The other two I'm just showing you. So another thing I can do here is I can do new query. And I'm going to change a couple of things here. You do not have to do them, but if you want, I'm going to go to Tools, Options. I'm just going to make my font big enough for you to see. Fonts and colors. Like 20, maybe 24. I'm also going to go to Text Editor, All Languages, and enable line numbers. You can change everything under Tools Options. Literally everything about this is changeable. Yeah.
Do show that again.
So Tools Options. So this is new query, like right there, right? And then for formatting it, it's Tools Options. And what I did is font, which you don't have to change, but if you want, that's under Environment, fonts and colors. And then I went to Text Editor, All Languages, and added line numbers. And I did this just to make it big, right? So you guys could go by without any of it, although you might want the line numbers.
Wait, what was the line numbers?
So they're under Options, Tools, Options, Text Editor, All Languages. All right, so I'm going to create another table. I think I'm going to call it sale. And I'm going to open and close a parentheses. And then we're going to put the other stuff in there. This is the SQL way to do it. I'm going to do sale ID. We'll make it an integer. I'm going to make it an auto number. So again, starts at 1 and counts by 1. You could change those. And I'm going to make it a primary key. Comma. Let's do sale date. And I'll do this as date time. And I'm going to do something you don't have to do. I'm going to say default current timestamp. And then a comma. And then I'll do customer ID. Int. And this is a foreign key, so I'm actually just going to type foreign key. And then I'm going to break the line. You don't have to, but I'm going to. References, customer, customer ID. So that's how it would look in SQL. Probably have some more. The default is optional. That just means that by default, when you do an entry, it's going to just do the current timestamp, date and time for that. Sale ID, give it a data type. Identity is not a data type. It is a function. It's a function that increments the numbers one after another. And then this makes it a primary key. There's always a comma between columns. Sale date, that's the name of the column. Date time is the data type. There are date data types. There are time data types if you wanted to separate them. Current timestamp means, again, whatever the computer time is what it'll pop in there. Time and date. And then this customer ID is related to it's a foreign key, so this makes it a foreign key. This is the syntax for making a foreign key. Does that make sense? In a lot of languages, you should do this. And you should do it in SQL too, but Microsoft ignores them. Doesn't matter whether you put them there or not. So I tend to be lazy and tend to leave them out. And then I go into another language, another environment, and have to put them there, and it gets a little bit more a problem. SQL is not case sensitive, which is nice. And the values aren't case sensitive. Traditionally, these, if you're doing them in text, these are usually put in all caps. There's no reason they have to be in all caps, but that's just sort of a traditional way of doing them, and I'm too lazy to do that. Except when I'm doing it for like display for other people, like typically in a like a blog, or I've been writing a book on SQL. So it's not hard. This is my preferred way if I'm doing it myself, right? Because it's fast, it's efficient, and it's reusable. Once you have the script written, you can just run it on any machine that has an SQL server, and it will create it. So I haven't run this yet. So I go up to there, I execute with the execute, and it says that it's successful. And again, I need to right-click on tables and refresh to see that the sale is there. And it has the sale ID with a little black key, and it has a little white key for the foreign key. Okay. I don't expect you to do this. You're welcome to try and do it if you want. But you haven't learned SQL yet, most of you. We will do a little bit of SQL, but towards the end of this. So that's another way to do it too. Yeah. So did you run your customer table? Did you save it? Yeah, did you save it? So let's do bakery. Let's open it. Yeah, let's open the tables. So we have customers there. Let's see your code. Customer ID. Foreign key. References. Customer ID. Let's open this up. Customer ID. Customer ID. We put a plus beside it. And then plus beside it. And then flip over just a little bit so I can see the deleted types. You got int, not not. That actually should be. All right. References. Customer. That looks like it should work. Oh, you know, you haven't given it a name. Create table sale.
There at the top.
Yeah.
Okay.
On this? Yeah, right there.
Okay. Save this here.
Yeah, I don't know if I need to say that. Yeah, just try executing it. Yeah. Anyone else? Again, this is, you can do, I'll show you at the very end of this class, a script you can look at if you want. All right, so I'm going to now show you the third way, which is the way I think you will prefer. I think it's the easiest way. So there's this database diagrams here. I'm going to right-click. So new database diagram. It always gives this message the first time, which says you don't have one or more of the components that you need. Do you want them? You say yes. Gives me a list of the tables we have so far. But you could start empty. So I'm going to add those. And then I'm going to close this. So those are my two tables so far. In the Microsoft icon here, this is the one side. This would be the crow's foot, except it's a little infinity link. It looks like a chain to me, but I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be an infinity. So one to many, one customer, many sales.
Oh, wait, no.
So I am going to do a new table. And the way I do that, I just right-click in the white, anywhere in the white. I'm going to do a new table. Let's call this product. And I'm going to do OK. And it gives me a designer, kind of like we had before. Now, the reason we didn't do our diagrams in this, the reason we used Lucidcharts, is that when we make our tables here, it's going to make them in the database. I really think that's a poor way to do design, where you're actually creating the tables as you're trying to manipulate the design. I just think that's a bad idea. When we get to MySQL, it has a much better designer where you can do whatever you want in the designer, and it doesn't become real until you decide it's real, and then you go up to the menu and say, make it, basically. But this one automatically makes the stuff. So that's why we did Lucidcharts, but the principle here is the same. And what I would suggest is that when you're making these tables and things, the designer here is going to be your easiest way, particularly for relationships, which I will show you in a moment. So I'm going to do a column name. So let's do product ID. Data type. I tend to make all my keys integers these days. You don't have to, but they do have to be unique. Again, I can right-click and say set primary key. If I want this to be auto increment, which again isn't important for our small little database, the properties this time, instead of down at the bottom, are along the side. And I actually prefer that. It's easier to read them. But if I go down to identity specification, is identity, I can change that to yes, and it gives me the 1-1. And again, you can start at something different if you want. You can start your sales at 1,000 or 10,000, whatever you want. And again, that part isn't super important. Let's do product name. And I'd probably do in varchar, and if you want more than 50, you can, and I would make that required. And let's do product price. And this is probably all I'm going to do because I'm not going to build the database out fully. So with product price, you have some options. I'm looking. There's a money data type. Works perfectly fine. You're welcome to use it. The thing that drives some people crazy with the money data type is that it has 4 decimal places. Right? I don't know why it has 4. Banks go out farther than that. Banks go out to your last decimal that they can get. And we usually think of money as 2 places. So I don't know why they'd settled on 4. There might be some accounting scheme in which 4 is the proper amount. I don't know. Does anybody know? Yeah, possibly. I mean, because they do trade in fractions of pennies. So, but you can do that, or the other option is decimal. Now, if you do decimal, the way, notice how it has 2 numbers there, 18, 0. Right now, that means that there's 18 digits to the left of the decimal point and 0 digits to the right. So if we did like 6, 2, that means that there would be 6 total digits with 2 of them on the right side of the decimal point.
It costs $1 million, doesn't work.
What?
You can't have $1 million.
No, your largest admissible value would be 9999.99. But you can limit, I mean, if you're never going to have anything that's bigger than that, or you can make this, you can give it whatever precision you want, right? But this will give you your 2 decimal places. Or you can just use money. Does that make sense? Decimal is basically a float where you determine how much of a float it is. There is a float value where you don't have any control over the number of decimal places too. One of the things that the ANSI standards people do is they said that you have to have an integer value, you have to have a float value, You have to have a fixed character, and you have to have a variable character, and you have to have some way to deal with dates and times. That's about as specific as they get. So each company is free to invent all the different variations. There's a lot of different int values here. There's a lot of different kinds of floats. There's a lot of different kinds of date times. You know, they added a whole bunch of things. They meet the standard, but they also have a lot of other extras. I'm going to let that be good. But you could, as I said, you can use money. So notice that this is full. If you want to go back down to a view like this, there's a table view at the very top. We're in standard view, but you can go to like just column names, and that's that. Any of these, you can right-click at the top, and if you go to standard, it'll show the data types and whether it's nullable or not. And then if you go back to column names, you can do that with all of them. So looks like you're about done.
I think everything's installed.
Good. So now you should be able to just go open up Management Studio. SQL, so Microsoft's SQL Server Management Studio. All right, so I did product for a reason here. I'm going to add another table, and again, I'm just going to right-click in the middle and do a new table. And I'll do sale detail. I'm tired. I already did this all once earlier today. All right, so we have sale detail. I'm just going to move it down here. I'll do the sale detail ID. Data type int. And I'll right-click and do primary key. And again, if you want to go over here, is identity, you can change that to yes. I do that. Well, actually, I don't make my databases this way very often, but let me see if we got it here. So let's go over here. And then let's go down. So SQL Server keys. Sometimes it's really hard to get up with the first time.
I know, I'm not used to that.
And you can close those installers if you want. All right, so I'm going to do, the other thing is going to be a sale ID, and I'm going to make it an int. And we'll make it a foreign key in a moment. And I'm also going to do product ID. And I'll make it an int. Okay. So I have sale ID, sale detail ID, sale ID, and product ID. These, oops, I'm sorry. These are both foreign keys, right? I don't have to do this in order to do it, but I will go back to column names. All right, so if I want to hook product to product ID, I can grab the key here, and I can just drag it. I didn't get it. I can drag it over here and just drop it on product ID. So when I look at this, it tells me that the primary key table is product, with the key is product ID, and the foreign key table is sale detail with product ID. It's really important to check that, because if you get them wrong, you'll have trouble entering data. I'm going to do OK. There's all sorts of options you can do, but I'm just going to take them default. And notice there's a link now between these two. I can do the same with sale. I can grab sale. I can drag it over here and drop it on sale. You need to drop it on the right field. Okay, and then it gives me this. You should make sure that the tables are correct. You can do OK, OK, and then you have those things. Those relationships are made. It's a lot easier to make the relationships this way than it is in the table view that I did first, because I didn't show you, but you have to go into the properties to make the table. Yeah.
It's way better.
Yeah, this is a lot easier. And then you can just, when you're done with these, you just save it. You have to save the diagram 0 will do fine for me. Say yes, we got to save all these things. And then if I go over to tables here, I will refresh, and all my tables will be there. And if you look at sale detail in the columns, it has the foreign keys and all of that. It does not mark foreign keys in this diagram. That drives some people crazy because we were doing that. We put FKs there, and it makes it a lot more readable.
Grab the key.
But this diagram does not do that. No foreign key mark. You can kind of tell when you get over here, they have the little white keys beside them. That's a sign that they're successful foreign keys. What else did I want to say? Oh, you notice how I had to refresh over here. This and this are disconnected. Did I say that already?
Okay.
In the original version of SQL Server 2005, these two things were intimately connected and they crashed all the time. So in order to fix it, they split them. So what happens over here doesn't reflect over here until you refresh.
How do you delete the connections?
What?
Let's say if you did something wrong, how do you delete it?
So if you want to delete a connection, you just click on the connection, right click, delete relations.
No. So if you screw up, you can just redo it.
Yeah, you can redo. And basically what you can do in here is just recreate your Vincent's vinyl, right? Now I'll show you one other thing. If you want to enter data, so you can't do that from here, but let's go to customer. There's a thing that says edit top 200 rows. And it gives you here, so customer ID is brown because it's an auto number. But I'll do name. I don't know. I just watched the Doctor Who thing, so I'll do Tim Shaw. And you can widen this out if you want. Now, there's a reason this has a red thing. It looks really scary, but it just means that it isn't saved yet. As soon as I click to the next row, it's saved. Also, because I have auto number on, it will pop up a number here. If you didn't do the auto number, then you have to manually add the numbers, right? If you didn't do the identity. And you can just enter these, this way. Now, though, this is customer ID 1. If I go to the sale table and right click and do edit top 200 rows, the sale ID is automatic. Sale date. Actually, I'm curious because I did a default there. Let's do customer ID 1, and you just have to, it didn't work. So I need to give it a date. Actually, I wonder. It's not letting me do that. I can't really do another sale unless it's the same customer. I wonder why it won't let me. I'm curious. I'm going to kill that. I'm going to bring it back. See, it did put the date in there. Just didn't put it in the designer when I was doing it. So that worked. I'm going to enter some products, but I want to show you. Here's another way to enter products. Are any of them? You can insert into the table you want. And then a parentheses, and we need the names of the fields for the table.
Can you slow down for a second? I got
Sure.
I wasn't able to save my the diagram. Is that what we're looking at?
What did it just hit the little the little disk.
Okay. And then it's gonna be still be under.
So did you hit the little disk? It looks like, yeah. It's not
And
saving.
then where? Where?
Well, it would show up under diagram, but it's not saved yet.
Can we do this? Oh, okay.
Then do okay. Or you can name it if you want. I can leave it diagram or whatever. And yes,
And then now it's gonna be here.
you might need to refresh, and then the diagram will be in there. And then your tables should be the tables too. Okay. So this is just an option. Again, it's not what you have to do. So I would want to enter product name and product price. You don't enter into a field if you've auto-numbered it. But if I hadn't, this was a bakery. Let's do plain donut. I'm not going to worry about capitalization. For the price, and if I wanted to enter another value, I could do and I could do that, etc., for as long as I want. If I run that, oh, you know what? I'm not sure I'm in the right database. No, I am. That should work. So that worked, 2 rows affected.
So it knows that you've already run the statements above that?
Yeah, so if I select only this, it'll only run that.
Oh, that's what you did that before.
Yeah. So again, if I select only that, it'll run that. So this is another way you can do inserts. I will post these little snippets, but you don't have to do them this way. Again, this is the SQL way. We will do some of this after we created the database and put some sample data, and it will run some SQL, just so you can see how to pull data out. All right. One last thing I'm going to show you. This is totally not necessarily relevant to anything. I'm going to do a new query. I'm going to go to my GitHub site, which is github.com/spconger. And there is under database schema. So there is a bakery SQL actually. There's a book review SQL and a cert tracker. There's some different ones. I'll do the community assist SQL. And basically this is a script to create a database and populate it. Again, we're not going to use this database, so you don't have to do this. I use it for other classes. I'm going to do raw. I'm going to just select and copy. I'm going to paste it. So big. Oh, I go back up to the top. So notice first thing it does, actually the very first thing it does is it looks to see if Community Assist exists. If it does, it drops the database, it gets rid of it. And then it creates the database. So this is not a good, if you've been doing things in the database and you run the script again, it'll wipe out what you had and put it back in its original form. Don't have to worry about a XML schema. Some of that is there's a lot of stuff that's extra here, but then it gets down into creating the tables. One reason for the square brackets and everything, I actually I generated the script, so it did a lot of that. It puts square brackets around column names because it doesn't know if they have legal names or not. Like if you had spaces or something, it wouldn't work, but if you put square brackets around it, it will work. Does that make sense? So anyway, if I go up here and execute this, that's all the data being inserted, all those one rows affected. And I can go,
What does it mean, one row?
it says that for every row that's been inserted. So when I look at Community Assist, now I have all these tables, and all these tables have data in them too. It's just that the SQL is a really nice way to move data around if your database is small. Like the biggest table in here has maybe 150 records. That's small. If you had a database with tens of thousands of records, it would be like a set of encyclopedias the size of a text when you do this, and it just wouldn't run. So this is an easy way to move around data if it's small, and the structure of the database. So, and you can, this is what this database diagrams were for, really, is to see the structure of existing databases. So this is, that's just an information one. This is the structure of that database. So it's good for documentation. It's good for making edits. It's not what I would choose for actually designing the database. That's extra. You don't have to do that. But you're welcome if you want to play with any of the database scripts that are up there. There are several. So that was a lot. Questions? So I'm going to assume we start next time. And I'm also going to assume that most of this won't stick. But what I think when you start working at it hands-on, then I can come around and help you through the pieces of it as you go. So I don't know, you can save anything here you want. I'm going to save all, although you don't need to save that script if you did the Community Assist one. Just because once it's been made, you can discard it. I'm going to close the SQL Server. Or at least I was trying to.
Can we save this as an SQL file?
Oh, you can if you want. I actually probably should have saved that. I'm looking for that. Here we go. No, that's not the one. I'll copy that so I can paste it. All right. And I'll close this. What I'm trying to get to is it's actually a really good idea to close out of the virtual machines. Oops, wrong way. Couple of things. If you hit the little pause, it'll save state. That means that it'll save it exactly the way you left it. That works 99% of the time, but when the 1% of the time it fails, I can't fix it. If you close all the way out, I can sometimes fix it if something goes wrong. But if it saves state, I just generally can't fix it. So I usually just shut everything down, and then actually quit the virtual machine just like you would quit Windows. Not log out, but actually shut down. So I'm shutting it down. And then once it's done shutting down, I close VMware. I will stop the video and I will post that little bit of SQL code. I might show you. My mouse is trapped. Okay, so now it's dead.